Welcome to Terrifying Creepy Stories, where real nightmares come to life. I post true terrifying stories every 48 hours, so like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell if you dare. Story 1. I was 19 in 2003, just out of school, working at a small rundown car wash on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a few wash bays, some rusty pressure hoses, and a tiny shack where we kept supplies. We had one old, flickering neon sign that barely worked and a busted radio in the shack that only picked up static half the time. Business was usually slow at night, but on Fridays we stayed open until 7 p.m. to catch the last-minute rush. That night had been long. Too long. My back ached from bending over all day. My hands were raw from the cold water, and all I wanted was to finish up, go home, and get ready for a night out with my friends. We had already made plans to hit a bar downtown, and I was looking forward to blowing off some steam. I had just finished wiping down the last car when I checked my Casio watch. 7:03 p.m. I sighed. The other guys had already clocked out, leaving me alone to lock up. I stepped into the tiny restroom to splash some water on my face, hoping to shake off the exhaustion before heading home. The small mirror above the sink was cracked in the corner, and as I stared at my own tired reflection, a strange feeling crept into my gut. Like I wasn't alone. I turned sharply. The restroom was empty. Just the old mop leaning against the wall, the buzzing fluorescent light above me, and the distant sound of cars speeding down the main road. I exhaled and shook off the weirdness. I was just tired. That was all. Then I heard it. An engine. A car pulling into the lot. I frowned. We were closed. Who the hell was coming in this late? Grabbing a rag, I wiped my hands as I stepped outside. A black sedan rolled into the wash bay, its headlights illuminating the wet pavement. It was one of those long, old-school models, something out of the 70s, like the kind you'd see in a gangster movie. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. The engine rumbled softly, steady, like a slow heartbeat. I sighed, already deciding I was going to turn them away. I was exhausted. But then another thought crossed my mind. Extra cash. I usually charge £10 for a wash, but this guy was late, and I was doing him a favor. I figured I'd up the price. If he argued, I'd tell him we were closed. Simple. I walked up to the driver's side and knocked on the window. It didn't roll down. Instead, the back window lowered, and that's when I saw him. A middle-aged man, wearing a black button-up shirt and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat, sitting in the back seat. Alone. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat was empty. Just him sitting in the back staring at me. Something about that didn't sit right. I hesitated, throat dry. We're closed, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. I'll pay you extra, he said. His voice was deep, steady, and unsettlingly calm. How much? A weird discomfort twisted in my gut. Oh. I hesitated before blurting out, 25. I half expected him to argue, maybe scoff at the price hike, but he didn't. He just nodded. Fine. I forced a small nervous chuckle. All right then, but just so you know, I'll be locking up after this. The man didn't respond. Instead, he lifted a single finger and pointed at me. Do not open the doors, he said. Do not clean the interior. I blinked. Oh, all right. He rolled the window up before I could say anything else. I grabbed the pressure hose, hands slightly unsteady, and began washing the car. The moment the first spray of water hit the metal, a strange chill ran through me. It was like the air around the car had dropped 10 degrees. The water sounded wrong. Instead of the usual sharp splattering against metal, it was dull, muted. As I moved around to the back of the car, something caught my eye. A drop, then another, thick black liquid, sliding down the trunk, weaving through the rivulets of water like oil. I frowned and stepped closer, squinting under the flickering neon lights. It wasn't oil, it was blood. My breath hitched. The droplets oozed slowly, thick and dark, trailing down from the closed trunk. My gut twisted, an overwhelming urge to back away, clawing at my chest. Then, a single creak, the back door shifted, just slightly, as if something inside had pressed against it. My heart pounded. I moved to rinse the back of the car, my grip unsteady on the pressure hose. The soapy water slid down the trunk, revealing the smooth, polished surface beneath. And then, a single drop, thick, black. It splattered against the wet pavement near my foot. I froze. My heart lurched in my chest as another drop followed. Then another. It wasn't water. It was blood. But it was too dark, too thick to be human. A chill spread through my veins. My stomach twisted as the slow, steady drip became a trickle, seeping from the closed trunk like something inside was bleeding out. I took an unsteady step back, my breath shallow, my mind scrambling for an explanation. Then the car engine roared back to life. I jolted, nearly dropping the hose. No one had gotten inside. No one had touched the ignition. But the headlights flared to life, casting long, stretching shadows across the pavement, and then it began to move. Not fast, not sudden, just a slow, crawling roll forward, like an unseen driver was easing it out of the wash bay. My chest tightened. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to get as far away as possible, but I couldn't move, because just as the car reached the edge of the lot, the back window rolled down, and from the darkness inside, a hand too long, too thin, too black, emerged. It moved with a slow, deliberate motion, fingers flexing as if savoring the air. Then just as smoothly it tossed something onto the pavement with a soft, wet slap, a wad of cash, 25 pounds. The hand lingered for a second too long, its fingers twitching, almost beckoning. Then it withdrew, the window rolled up, and the car was gone. I stood there, unable to breathe, unable to think. The silence it left behind was suffocating. The only sound was the steady pounding of my pulse in my ears. I hesitated, then forced myself to step forward towards the money. My fingers trembled as I reached out, but stopped inches away. Blood. The bills were stained with it, dark, thick, fresh. I recoiled. A cold sweat coated my skin. I left it there, untouched, and turned away, forcing myself to move, to leave, to pretend I had never seen any of this. I didn't sleep that night, and when I returned to the car wash the next evening, my stomach twisted into knots as I hesitantly glanced at the spot where the money had been. It was gone. No blood stains. No sign it had ever been there. All just clean, empty pavement, and somehow, that was the worst part. Story 2. I never wanted to believe in ghosts. It's not that I was a skeptic. I just never thought much about them. Ghost stories were for old folks whispering under dim porch lights, for drunken tales around bonfires, for kids scaring each other in the dark. Not for me. But that was before I started feeling them. Before I started seeing them. I live in the countryside of Argentina, in a remote area surrounded by dense forests and endless fields. The land has history, dark history, wars, forgotten settlements, tragedies buried beneath the soil. It's the kind of place where the air feels heavy, where the wind carries voices you can't quite make out. But I was never the superstitious type. Just a man living in a quiet house with my younger brother Lucas. It all started 5 years ago. I was asleep in my bed when I felt it. Light, deliberate footsteps pressing into the mattress beside me. I jolted awake, my breath stuck in my throat. At first I thought it was Lucas's cat, Milo. He was small, restless, always sneaking onto my bed at night. I reached out blindly, my fingers searching for fur, but there was nothing. The room was silent. I turned on my bedside lamp, my heart thudding, eyes scanning the sheets, the floor, the corners. Nothing, just the faint sound of wind outside, the distant croak of frogs in the field. Maybe I imagined it, maybe it was a dream, but as soon as I laid back down, step, I froze, the unmistakable feeling of pressure against my legs, as if something were standing there, shifting its weight. I threw the blanket off, jumped up, flicked on every light in my room. My skin was cold, my heart hammering against my ribs. Still, nothing. I didn't sleep much that night, or the next night, or the next, because it kept happening, every single night. At first I convinced myself it was stress, or maybe some kind of sleep disorder, like sleep paralysis. But then one morning, over breakfast, Lucas looked up from his coffee and said casually, "Do you ever feel like footsteps on your bed at night?" I nearly dropped my spoon. My stomach twisted into knots. "What?" He shrugged, stirring his coffee. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like something's walking around on my bed. But when I look, There's nothing there. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't know what scared me more. The fact that it wasn't just in my head, or the fact that Lucas said it so casually, like it was a normal thing. I didn't tell him I had been experiencing the same thing. Not yet. I just nodded, pretending it was nothing. But deep down, I felt something shifting inside me. We weren't alone, and then it got worse. For 3 years the footsteps followed us, sometimes light, like a child walking, sometimes heavy, like a full-grown man pacing at the foot of my bed. Some nights, I would feel a slow, deliberate weight press down onto the mattress beside me, like someone sitting there, watching. Lucas started sleeping with a flashlight. I started drinking just to fall asleep. And then one day, I had enough. I moved. I built a small cottage further back on the property, a one-room getaway, where I could finally escape whatever was haunting our house. Lucas stayed in the main house. I told myself I was free, that it was over. But it wasn't. It was just beginning. The first time I saw them, I was alone in my cottage, sitting at my desk, nodding off in front of my computer. It was late. The kind of late where the world feels empty, where the only sounds are your own breathing, and the occasional groan of the wind. And then, movement. Just at the edge of my vision, I turned but there was nothing, just my dimly lit room, the glow of my computer screen reflecting off the window. I looked back at the screen. There it was again, a shadow, a figure, moving just out of sight. My skin prickled, my stomach tightened. I focused on the screen, letting my eyes adjust. Then slowly, very slowly, I let my gaze shift toward the movement, a person, standing right there just at the threshold of my vision. The moment I tried to look at them directly, they were gone. My entire body went rigid. I forced myself to breathe, my mind racing. It had to be a trick of the light. Maybe my eyes were tired. Maybe, but then it happened again, and again, every night. Figures standing in my peripheral vision, watching me, moving, laughing, and worst of all, they weren't alone. I started to recognize them. A woman in a pale blue dress, her dark hair pulled into a bun. A man in a dirt-streaked jacket. A boy, maybe 10 years old, who liked to sit cross-legged on my floor, grinning. There were others too, so many others, and they were always there in my kitchen, my hallway, the corners of my room. The scariest part, they saw me too, and they could touch me. I felt their hands brush against my shoulders, felt their breath near my ear. One night, as I sat frozen in my chair, the boy climbed onto the back of it, his small hands gripping the headrest. I didn't dare move. I wanted to scream. Then I felt his fingers trace down my neck. That night, I barely made it to my bed. I didn't even bother turning off my computer. I crawled under the covers, my entire body trembling, and shut my eyes so tight it hurt. I didn't sleep. And the worst part, I knew that when I opened my eyes they'd still be there. And they don't seem to be going anywhere. Story 3. Back in 2017, I was renting a small rundown house on the outskirts of a struggling old mining town in West Virginia. The place was dirt cheap, too cheap, but I hadn't questioned it much at the time. It sat at the edge of a narrow, cracked road, partially swallowed by overgrown trees and brush. The roof sagged slightly, and the front porch creaked even under my light steps. The landlord had been upfront that the house had some history, but I had brushed it off. I wasn't looking for history. I was looking for something I could afford. The first few months were uneventful, just me and the occasional scurry of a raccoon or a stray cat outside. But on one of the first warm nights of spring, something happened that I still can't quite wrap my head around. It was just past 3:30 a.m. when I was jolted awake by an unfamiliar sound, soft at first but persistent. The distinct metallic rattle of a doorknob being tested. At first I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, maybe even the house settling. But then the noise came again, a deliberate turn, then another. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I lived alone. No one should have been at my back door. I pulled my phone off the nightstand and crept toward the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the warped wooden floor. The only light came from the dim glow of the street lamp outside, casting long uneasy shadows along the walls. My back door, an old wooden thing with peeling white paint, shuddered slightly as the knob jiggled again. Someone was trying to get in. I swallowed hard and forced my voice to come out steady. "Wrong house," I called out. "Move along." Silence. For a moment I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe some drunk or lost soul had mistaken my place for theirs. Then came the sound of nails, or something hard, scraping against the wood, slow, deliberate, like testing its strength. I stepped back, every hair on my body standing on end. Something wasn't right. Then suddenly, bang, the door rattled in its frame as if someone had thrown their full weight against it. My stomach lurched. Then another slam, more forceful this time. The wood groaned, the lock barely holding. I scrambled backward, fumbling in the kitchen drawer for something, anything to defend myself. My fingers found the handle of a steak knife, and I clutched it tightly, my breath shallow and uneven. Then, silence again. I stood frozen, my pulse thudding in my ears. I counted the seconds. 5, 10, nothing. And then a loud thump from the opposite side of the house. The kitchen door. I spun, my stomach twisting into knots. She, whoever she was, had moved around the house. The back door had been a distraction. Now she was trying to get in through the kitchen. I forced my legs to move, rushing toward the sound, my grip tightening around the knife. I reached the kitchen just as the doorknob twisted violently. This door was even weaker than the last, just a thin wooden frame with an old rusted lock. I had to do something. I sucked in a breath and banged my palm against the door. "You need to leave, now." For the first time, I heard her, a soft, garbled whisper. "Let me in." I went cold. The voice was hoarse, ragged, almost inhuman in its desperation. "Go away," I shouted, hoping my voice carried more confidence than I felt. Then came a guttural sound, a low, keening wail that didn't sound like any human I had ever heard. It sent shivers up my spine. That was it. I grabbed my phone with my free hand and called 911. "Someone's trying to break into my house," I whispered, pressing my back against the counter. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but I could barely register what she was saying over the blood rushing in my ears. "Stay where you are, sir. Officers are on the way." But I didn't know if I had time to wait. Then, scraping, more scratching against the door. She was still there. Minutes passed like hours. I kept my eyes locked on the door, barely daring to breathe. And then from the front of the house, a loud, sharp knock. I hesitated. Was it the cops, or was it her again? Then a voice. "Police, open up." I rushed to the door and yanked it open. A uniformed officer stood there, his hand on his holster. His partner was scanning the yard with a flashlight. "She was trying to get in," I gasped. "First the back, then the kitchen." The officer nodded. "Stay inside." I did as I was told, locking the door behind me. I listened as they moved around the house, their voices low, their radios crackling. Then, a scream, a high-pitched animalistic wail. I jumped. There was a scuffle, a yell, then silence. Minutes later, there was another knock. I opened it to find the officer standing there, his face pale. "We got her." Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. "Who was she?" He hesitated. "You'll need to come down to the station to file a report." I did, and that's when I learned the truth. Her name was Lisa, a single mother of 3, a former waitress who had fallen into addiction after losing her job. Homeless, desperate. She had been high, confused, possibly didn't even know where she was. I stared at her mugshot. She looked so normal, not like some monster trying to break into my home. Just a woman, hollow-eyed, broken by life. I didn't press charges. I still don't know if I made the right choice. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear that wail, the sound of someone lost in their own mind, clawing at reality, desperate for something they could never find. Story 4. It was a Saturday, a day I usually reserve for errands. I had driven to the grocery store, which was about a 12-minute drive from my house. After picking up everything on my list, I returned home and began putting the groceries away. That was when I realized I had forgotten to buy detergent for my laundry. Sighing in frustration, I grabbed my keys and headed back out. The drive was uneventful, and I quickly grabbed the detergent, paid, and was on my way back to my car when I ran into an old business partner. We exchanged pleasantries, caught up briefly, and before parting ways, he asked for my number, explaining that he had lost most of his contacts when he switched phones. Since we had worked together before, I had no reason to hesitate. I took his phone and input my number. Just as he was about to save it, he decided to dial the number, likely to ensure it was correct. To my surprise, someone answered. A cold chill crawled up my spine. My friend gave me a confused look and asked if I had given him the wrong number. I frowned, grabbed his phone, and stared at the screen. The number was correct, my number, but there was someone on the other end of the call. I felt my throat tighten as I put the phone to my ear. "Hello? Who is this?" Only ragged breathing answered me. I excused myself hastily, my heart hammering in my chest as I rushed to my car. I drove home as fast as I could, half expecting to see an intruder escaping or signs of a break-in, shattered windows, a broken door, something. But when I pulled up to my house, everything looked intact. I hesitated before stepping out of the car, scanning my surroundings. The street was quiet. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across my front yard. I unlocked the door cautiously and stepped inside, gripping my long tennis bat for protection. Everything was eerily silent, save for my own breathing. I moved toward my bedroom, my pulse pounding in my ears. My phone should have been exactly where I left it, on my nightstand, locked, and with Spotify playing, but it wasn't. I found my phone lying on my bed, unlocked. My gallery app was open. A cold wave of unease washed over me. I was sure I had locked it before leaving, and I hadn't been in my gallery. My hands trembled as I picked it up, scanning through my photos. Nothing seemed out of place until I reached the last one. It was a picture of my room, taken from the doorway. I felt my stomach drop. A noise behind me made me spin around. From the corner of my eye, I saw a small figure dart across the room, disappearing into my restroom. The door slammed shut behind it. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. My chest tightened with panic. Slowly, gripping the tennis bat like a lifeline, I crept toward the restroom. My palms were slick with sweat. The entrance. I froze. Wet footprints, tiny, child-sized, were imprinted on the floor. I swallowed hard. I lived alone. There shouldn't have been anyone else in my house. Summoning my courage, I took a shaky step forward. Before I could open the door, a small voice whimpered from the other side. "Mummy?" The air left my lungs. I wasn't sure if it was fear or confusion taking over, but I couldn't bring myself to open that door. I backed away, sprinted outside, and called 911. When the police arrived, they entered the house with their weapons drawn. It didn't take long before they found the child, hiding in my closet. A young girl, no older than 5, and then they found her mother. A woman, disheveled and trembling, was discovered hiding in my kitchen pantry. After an interrogation, the truth surfaced. She had a spare key to my kitchen door. How she got it, I had no idea. She had let herself in with her daughter while I was away and had been rummaging through my belongings. When she heard me return unexpectedly, she panicked and forgot about her daughter in the house before escaping. But there was more. She had unlocked my phone. The police never found out how she knew my password, and I never discovered what she had been looking for in my gallery. I deleted every picture I had on social media, changed my locks, and tried to move on. But the paranoia never left me. 5 months later, I moved out of the house. To this day, I still wonder how she had gotten my key, how she had entered my home undetected, and most of all, what she had seen in my photos. Do you have a terrifying or creepy story of your own? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling videos. Stay safe if you can.